The migrant crisis, this international global crisis, really requires a federal resource response.
But there's much more at stake for the mayor with the question about, will the city commit to paying for care?
Temporary shelter, and then go through that process, and if there are beds that are available, then they certainly will be considered.
What if the federal government doesn't help you?
Well, clearly they haven't thus far.
But is that sustainable? Because you've said it isn't sustainable.
Well,
Something that we've been looking at is how to really get more mandated reporting from the government as they're making decisions.
Migrant crisis. According to two individuals who were on the call, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson met with senior White House officials late on Sunday and demanded that they act quickly to address a migrant crisis they felt was about to escalate in the Windy City. The two Democratic leaders and aides pushed for a conference call on short notice, during which they expressed concerns about Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott increasing the number of buses carrying migrants into the city. They contended that this could result in a doubling of the current number of migrants in the city, which is over 17,000, at a time when the city is known for its severe winters. Tom Perez, the Director of Intergovernmental Relations for the White House, and Jeff Zients, the Chief of Staff, encouraged Chicago to emulate the best practices implemented in New York, where fresh initiatives have been established to assist immigrants in obtaining work permits. However, this did not allay the worries of Pritzker and Johnson, who had also watched as state and local officials in New York City struggled to deal with the influx of thousands of migrants. As seen from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico on September 30, 2023, migrants who were left stranded near Villa Ahumada the day before and are now seeking asylum in the U.S. crossed the Rio Bravo River. With over 200,000 people apprehended in September, illegal border crossings reached a record high for the year. According to a copy of the letter obtained by CNN, Pritzker demanded on Monday that the federal government assume responsibility for a coordinated response at the border in a letter addressed to President Joe Biden. Local leaders around the nation have been more critical of the White House about the growing number of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border, highlighting the importance of the White House's relationships with Democratic allies across the nation. A governor who has been one of the president's strongest political allies and a vocal supporter of his re-election campaign is now becoming involved in the dispute over the immigration situation. It's also brewing in the city that will play host to the Democratic Convention the following year, an occasion that many involved already feel would serve as a draw for Republican governors to send even more migrants to the area. "We can't continue at that rate for even a week from now," a source close to the Pritzker administration stated. "They have to understand that we are about to snap." Johnson was informed of the letter's contents, but chose not to sign it. Still, he supports the initiative. According to someone briefed, Johnson was so dissatisfied with the White House position that he had his own one-on-one follow-up contact with Perez to emphasize the need for the federal government to do more. Johnson ended that meeting without feeling that aid was on the way.
The migrant crisis, this international global crisis, really requires a federal resource response.
The mayor is putting on pause that city new policy that kicks migrants out of shelters after 60 days.
What if the federal government doesn't help you?
Well, clearly they haven't thus far.
But is that sustainable? Because you've said it isn't sustainable.
Well,
has been casting it is trying to discuss it as, out-migration, resettlement, but...
The Sunday chat was verified by a White House aide who described it as a productive conversation that is a part of continuous engagement, which includes funding totaling $46 million to Illinois and Chicago to support newly arriving migrants. The aide mentioned the administration's concerted efforts to strengthen border security and extend work permits for those who have already entered the country, as well as the fact that since May 12th, 253,000 people have been repatriated to 152 countries, as opposed to 180,000 during the same period in 2019, when the Trump administration was in office. The administration has been taking action without the help of Congress, Angelo Fernandez Hernandez, a spokesman for the White House, said. Meanwhile, House Republicans continue to block the reform the immigration system needs and the $4 billion we requested to address the immediate needs of DHS to safely and humanely manage the southwest border, and support communities across the country. We will continue to engage closely with Illinois and states and communities across the country. Beatrice Ponce de Leon, the deputy mayor for immigrant, migrant, and refugee rights in Chicago, reported that a record number of migrant buses arrived last week. More than 2,900 migrants are living on the floors of police stations and Chicago's airports, awaiting placement in shelters.
But there's much more at stake for the mayor with the question about will the city commit to paying for care?
He also says the city is trying to move migrants out of the landing zone as quickly as possible to shelters.
But the main goal, of course, is to move with expedition people onto a life of sustainability.
It's certainly not acceptable for the governor to continue to send people to the city of Chicago, but we're meeting the moment.
The White House has grown increasingly worried about Chicago, considering the impending flood of migrants in the city, according to a person familiar with discussions. Sources close to the meeting claim that Perez and Johnson met late last month to talk about the current state of immigration in Chicago for more than an hour. Major aide to the mayor, Jason Lee, told CNN that he believes the White House's top aides are aware of the severity of the crisis Chicago is facing. We're trying to figure out what are the ways we can work with the White House and the executive branch, knowing that it's not sufficient, but we don't want to turn away or miss support that is there, Lee said. It's a fact that the federal government hasn't matched us dollar for dollar in terms of resources. They've given us some funding, but not enough for the issues we're facing, Lee stated. There is a correlation between the rise in border crossings and the growth of arrivals to U.S. cities.
Looming for migrants to start being evicted from Chicago's shelters, Mayor Brandon Johnson is now saying it will be enforced.
That current policies are too detrimental to public safety.
According to a Homeland Security official, Border Patrol arrested over 200,000 illegal migrants in September, the greatest number this year, and highlighting the persistent difficulties facing the Biden administration in the face of widespread migration in the area. When migrants are caught at the border, they may be detained, given the option of a speedy deportation process, allowed to return to Mexico, or released while they await further immigration proceedings. Venezuelans make up a large share of border crossings, and the U.S. generally can't deport them because of frosty diplomatic relations with Venezuela. Although Mexico has consented to accept some, the administration and the cities that will be receiving them still face a difficult and singular challenge. Additionally, Abbott has not consulted with states or local governments when busing migrants to locations outside of Texas, which has made it more difficult for those who are receiving migrants and sparked demands for federal intervention.
I think that Mayor Brandon Johnson seems to want to hold a moral high ground that he is absolutely entitled to, given...
Well, I think you've answered it. No, it's not sustainable. The Congress does have to act. And if they do not act...
Off the streets as we head into winter, the state of Illinois will invest an additional $160 million.
This change scares me. I used to feel safe here, and I really don't anymore.
In his letter to the White House, Pritzker stated that a single office with an identified leader must be assigned to work for the cities and states across the silos of government to manage the challenges we all face. Pritzker contended that this isn't about inciting anti-immigrant sentiment. Rather, it's about a state and city that have been left on their own. Pritzker stated in the letter that we believe in the fundamental right of every human, especially those facing persecution, to find refuge and live with dignity in this great country of ours. Unfortunately, the federal government has not offered the same kind of help as Illinois has been offering to these asylum seekers. Most importantly, he continued, Illinois is now in an untenable situation as a result of the federal government's lack of coordination and intervention at the border. We're quickly running out of money, the Pritzker administration insider continued. What we've gotten so far is Band-Aids. We need to stem the tide of the problem. Communities that are receiving migrants have received millions of dollars from the Department of Homeland Security. The department acknowledged the financial burden on cities last week when it announced an increase in funding of $12 million.
Johnson seems to be holding out hope that the federal government will come through with additional funding, but political observers say that's not very likely.
Going to continue to cause the type of chaos that the governor of Texas wants to do.
But we're running out of space. So where are these people going to go?
To follow the money, hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money spent on the city's migrant crisis.
Let me answer your question by saying that, we were very clear in our communication with the White House that
referring to the funds from the Shelter and Services Program, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas stated in a statement that SSP grants have provided critical support to communities receiving migrants, and the need for this support is ongoing. Democratic Mayor of New York City Eric Adams has remained vehemently critical despite one of his requested changes, which makes it easier for Venezuelan nationals to obtain work permits, having been approved by the administration. One of his closest advisors at City Hall, Ingrid Lewis Martin, stated over the weekend in an interview with the local New York television station, WPIX, "We need the federal government, the Congress, the Senate, and the President to do their job, close the borders." He is traveling to Latin America this week to raise awareness of the situation. Pritzker and Johnson did not go so far, but they did not accept that New York was doing a good job of handling things. In his letter, Pritzker called for several additional specific measures, including a significant increase in logistical coordination and data collection for people after they arrive in the country, more financial support for states and cities to provide social services, including housing, and waivers of the state's applications for federal support like Medicaid. After CBP releases migrants into the nation's interior, the federal government must cease evading its duties. Your administration has the capacity, resources, and legal recourse to do this right now, Pritzker wrote. As it stands, Pritzker added, the people of Illinois are carrying out for our entire nation the obligations to care for the huddled masses yearning to be free who are so desperately in need of assistance.
All that Chicago has done for this population, but we need to continue to see his actions and money.
Officials with the Homeland Security and State Department say they have seen a sharp drop in migrant crossings at the southern border.
Facilities will no longer be used as emergency shelters for migrants.
Some facilities will need maintenance as the city says the parks are no longer needed.
We're not evicting new arrivals out in the cold this winter. Our mission is to continue to live up to our values.
Chicago's migrant shelter evictions. More than 24 migrants were set to be kicked out of shelters Sunday, but the long-anticipated eviction only brought confusion and unanswered questions from the city. City officials said of the 34 migrants who received notices to leave Sunday, only 3 exited the system. The remaining 31 adults scheduled for evictions received extensions due to exemptions. 4 of the migrants were exempted because of disability and pregnancy, and 27 were awaiting benefits for housing. The adults were slated to be evicted from 3 different migrant shelters on March 17th, following an announcement by city officials at a Friday briefing with reporters. Alderman Andre Vasquez, 40th, said Sunday he hasn't been provided any information by city officials about many migrants will be evicted out of which shelters in the next few days. As chair of the city's immigration committee, he said having accurate census numbers is important to prevent homelessness and crime. What would you do if you didn't have a place to live or any means to survive, he asked. For months, Mayor Brandon Johnson has delayed enforcing his 60-day shelter limit policy, facing consternation from advocates who say thousands of migrants, many sent to Chicago on buses by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, have few other housing options. On Friday, his administration exempted about 4,500 migrants who were set to be evicted from the shelter system this spring. There are currently about 11,000 migrants staying in 23 shelters around the city.
As I said, I've worked with the governor and the mayor to try to meet the challenges of the new arrivals since August of 2022.
First round of migrant shelter evictions will take place today with about 35 people due to the outgrowing.
Worst winter weather we've seen in a while, only hours away. More than 500 migrants are still waiting for shelter space in Chicago.
Migrants are still without homes. They are sleeping at the airport in some cases, outside of Chicago police departments.
Exemptions will be determined on a case-by-case basis for people with medical issues, those who are in the process of leaving Chicago, securing housing, or who need to quarantine, according to officials. Pregnant women are exempt, and families with children can receive 3 30-day extensions. Officials say they are running out of money to house migrants. Cristina Pachion-Zayas, Johnson's deputy chief of staff, said at last week's briefing that the city is trying to slowly decompress 3 shelters in particular: the Woodlawn shelter at the former Wadsworth Elementary School, the Gage Park Fieldhouse on the southwest side, and a building on North Elston Avenue in Westtown. These are some of our more expensive shelters to operate, and what we're trying to do is optimize the resources that we have to be able to carry through, she said. To prepare for evictions, several volunteers set up a table outside the shelter in Woodlawn on Sunday. They stacked sandwiches wrapped in plastic and bags of toiletries, hoping to offer resources to migrants who had been kicked out. No migrants had left by the 2 p.m. deadline city officials touted last week. Instead, migrants living at the shelter grabbed the food and donations en route to the laundromat around the corner. So, volunteers packed up their table. About a dozen men stood outside the shuttered school and shivered. They said they'd been told by staff that the shelter was closing soon. "This is just the way life is for us," said Moises Lopez, 21, when asked about the looming eviction notices. "The uncertainty. It's not easy. There are many people who can't work, and we don't know what we're going to do." Most migrants don't qualify for work permit authorization, a permit that gives them the right to legally work in the U.S. Advocates say not having the document is a large barrier to migrants' autonomy and economic independence. Having received thousands of new arrivals in the middle of winter, Johnson had previously delayed shelter stay limits 3 times. He cited inclement weather as a reason not to kick people out. Jamie Groth-Searle, founder of Southwest Collective, said the administration had flip-flopped its policy so much that people aren't prepared. "It's a little bit of a surprise when they are told," she said. "Now they have to start all over again." Yorladis Reniteria, who stood outside the Fieldhouse in Gage Park with her husband, Aldo Reyes, Sunday morning, said her eviction date wasn't until April 30th. Reniteria didn't know of anyone inside who was leaving Sunday. "The city keeps changing their mind. I don't have kids, but I imagine it's just that much more scary for the families that do," she said.
As far as the landing zone is concerned, no, it was never designed to be a shelter.
Told me he's not sure where he's going, but that he and 3 of his children will have to be out of here.
Temporary shelter, and then go through that process, and if there are beds that are available, then they certainly will be considered.
The humanitarian crisis all tied to immigration. Migrants coming here to the city is unfolding on city streets.
Denver and New York have also received thousands of migrants in recent months and are adopting similar shelter limits, despite espousing welcoming values before Abbott's busing program. Chicago officials said migrants who are evicted can find their way back to the city's landing zone in the West Loop, where they can reapply for the shelter system if they want a bed. No migrant interviewed by the Tribune Sunday knew how to get to the landing zone, though they'd heard it was an option.
This is a global crisis. The policies that are impacting.
Goal to learn about how the Johnson administration plans to govern the city in the middle of a migrant crisis.
That is easier said than done, given that a lot of these migrants, they don't have work permits, they don't have a path to self-sufficiency.
It's not just as simple as, here's a building, take it. There's
Chicago's immigration policy. In recent discourse, Democratic Mayor Brandon Johnson's statements regarding Chicago's approach to immigration, coupled with critiques of Texas Governor Greg Abbott and conjecture about the influence of Trump supporters on local politics, have stirred controversy and shed light on broader issues surrounding immigration policy, resource allocation, and partisan dynamics. Firstly, Johnson's acknowledgement of Chicago's open and quite accommodating stance towards illegal immigrants reveals a nuanced approach to a complex issue. Chicago's policy of providing temporary shelter for migrants arriving from the southern border reflects a commitment to humanitarian principles and underscores the city's role as a sanctuary for those seeking refuge. However, Johnson's admission that this position is unsustainable highlights the strain placed on local resources and the need for robust federal support to address the challenges posed by immigration influxes. Johnson's juxtaposition of Chicago's purported generosity with criticism of other liberal cities suggests a degree of political posturing. By framing Chicago as a model of compassion amid a broader landscape of urban governance, Johnson seeks to distinguish his administration while also appealing to his political base.
Staying in city shelters will be evicted today. However, the city says it hopes to have more than 2,000 migrants out of shelters.
And perhaps he felt as though if he made this kind of a commitment to migrants, that there'd be a lot of backlash.
Yeah, Tanya and Val, that's exactly right. Brighton Park neighbors have been protesting this possible migrant tent camp location for hours now.
Is the bus situation acceptable?
Well, it's a temporary. I mean, look, it's a good question. You know, it's.
However, his caveat regarding the limitations of local resources underscores the broader structural deficiencies in addressing immigration at the municipal level, necessitating federal intervention for long-term sustainability. The mayor's criticism of Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott reflects broader partisan tensions surrounding immigration policy. Johnson's condemnation of Abbott's handling of migrant arrivals and characterization of his actions as disturbing and iniquitous underscores the ideological divide between Democratic and Republican approaches to immigration. By lambasting Abbott's purported lack of empathy and humanity, Johnson seeks to position himself as a moral counterpoint to conservative governance, appealing to his progressive constituency. Furthermore, Johnson's remarks regarding the influence of Trump supporters on local politics highlight the intersection of national and municipal dynamics. By suggesting that Trump supporters in Chicago played a role in blocking a real estate tax hike referendum, Johnson implicates broader partisan affiliations in local decision-making processes. His conjecture regarding the correlation between Trump supporters and referendum outcomes underscores the polarizing effect of national politics on local governance, illuminating the intricate interplay between ideology, identity, and electoral outcomes.
27 shelters is what I've built.
And they're all full.
And we have provided education, healthcare.
A measles outbreak. There were questions as to whether or not the city would actually go through with those evictions.
In the event the deadline does come, people will have an opportunity to re-enter into the shelter system.
The alderman, he held a meeting here in Greektown discussing this move that these migrants are actually going to officially come in.
However, Johnson's assertions regarding the influence of Trump supporters on local politics warrant scrutiny. While it is conceivable that partisan affiliations may influence voting behavior, attributing referendum outcomes solely to the actions of a specific demographic overlooks the multifaceted factors shaping electoral dynamics. Additionally, Johnson's remarks risk perpetuating divisive narratives that further polarize political discourse, potentially undermining efforts to foster unity and collaboration across ideological lines. Ultimately, Mayor Brandon Johnson's statements regarding Chicago's approach to immigration, criticisms of Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and conjecture about the influence of Trump supporters on local politics underscore the complex intersection of immigration policy, resource allocation, and partisan dynamics. While his advocacy for federal support and condemnation of conservative governance reflect broader ideological divisions, his remarks also highlight the need for nuanced, collaborative approaches to addressing complex societal challenges at both the local and national levels.
No one in the state of Illinois in this country is questioning Mayor Brandon Johnson's commitment to this mission.
Being frustrated that they don't think your administration is hearing them because of the monies that are being spent on the migrant crisis.
The city has already housed nearly 96,000 migrants, and more buses are expected to arrive over the next few days.
This is a slap in the face to immigrants who have worked hard their entire lives to get here, who have raised their children.
Alderman's plea prompts reevaluation. In the wake of the mounting concerns raised by Alderman Brendan Riley regarding the housing of migrants at the Inn of Chicago in Streeterville, tensions have escalated over the city's handling of the issue. Riley, along with Councilman Brian Hopkins, has urged Mayor Brandon Johnson to halt the use of the Inn of Chicago as a migrant shelter once the current housing contract expires on December 31st. Riley's concerns stem from reports of disturbances and illicit activities in the neighborhood since the arrival of approximately 1,500 migrants at the East Ohio Street location. Residents have lodged complaints ranging from loitering and illegal parking to allegations of drug sales and gender trafficking. Despite assurances from the Department of Family and Support Services regarding additional security measures, Riley asserts that these promises have gone unfulfilled, exacerbating tensions within the community. With the influx of migrant buses into the city showing no signs of abating, questions have arisen regarding the city's contingency plans moving forward. When pressed on the matter, Mayor Johnson affirmed that all options remain on the table, including the exploration of alternative housing solutions and potential involvement from state and federal authorities. However, concrete plans for addressing the concerns raised by Riley and other stakeholders remain elusive.
Then there's an opportunity for them to return to the beginning process.
What's important is that we really establish that this is a humanitarian crisis, and we're here.
Go back into the process again. This sounds like a terrible idea.
Something that we've been looking at is how to really get more mandated reporting from the government as they're making decisions.
Furthermore, scrutiny has intensified over Mayor Johnson's forthcoming trip to the southern border and its implications for the city's resources. While defending the necessity of his border visit as part of his mayoral duties, Johnson faced inquiries regarding the funding of this endeavor. In response, he reiterated his commitment to transparency and pledged to keep Chicagoans informed about his activities and decisions. The clash between Alderman Riley's plea and Mayor Johnson's response underscores the complex challenges facing local officials in navigating the intersection of immigration policy, community concerns, and resource allocation. As Streeterville grapples with the repercussions of hosting migrant populations, the efficacy of current measures and the need for comprehensive solutions are brought into sharper focus. Moreover, the mayor's impending border visit raises questions about priorities and resource allocation amidst ongoing domestic and international challenges.
People believe that there is more information that's available, then they're looking for nothing.
And on Tuesday, the mayor is holding a meeting with municipal leaders from cities and villages across the Chicago area.
Not yet decided whether to stick with next week's deadline to begin migrant shelter evictions.
Dozens of people rallied in Chicago today for a solution to the city's migrant crisis.
Residents criticize leaders. The complex and multifaceted issue of immigration continues to reverberate across American communities, with Chicago emerging as a focal point of both humanitarian efforts and local discontent. Against the backdrop of a nationwide influx of migrants, the challenges of integration, resource allocation, and political accountability are brought sharply into focus in the Windy City. At the heart of the matter lies a growing sense of frustration among Chicagoans, who perceive their concerns about the welfare of local residents, particularly the homeless and underprivileged, as being sidelined in favor of accommodating migrants. This sentiment reflects broader anxieties about the equitable distribution of resources and the prioritization of humanitarian aid in the face of pressing domestic needs. According to the Office of Emergency Management and Communications, Chicago currently shelters approximately 15,000 migrants, with an additional 300 seeking refuge aboard warming buses. However, the strain on resources is palpable, with reports of overcrowding, strained social services, and heightened tensions within the community. Residents have voiced complaints about loitering, illegal parking, and allegations of illicit activities, further exacerbating the fraught nature of the situation.
I believe that there is nobody more committed to this mission than Mayor Brandon Johnson, but of course, the money is really where.
There were close to 400 people living on buses. Now that number has significantly gone down.
In Congress and across the country, blame the Biden administration for this spike in illegal border crossings.
I don't feel safe having adult males with no health screenings, no criminal background checks around our children.
Kata Truss, a concerned resident, has been vocal about the need for a more balanced approach to resource allocation, particularly in light of Chicago's staggering public school deficit and burgeoning homeless population. Truss's concerns underscore the delicate balance between addressing the immediate needs of migrants and ensuring the well-being of local residents. Her critique extends to the broader political landscape, with blame placed on the Democratic Party's border policies and President Biden's handling of the crisis. Truss's sentiments are echoed by Sam Sanchez, who highlights the exclusionary nature of current immigration policies, which he argues prioritize asylum applicants over legitimate immigrants and American citizens. Sanchez's frustration speaks to broader anxieties about fairness and equity in the allocation of resources, particularly as vulnerable populations continue to face systemic barriers to access and support. The issue of immigration has also taken on a political dimension, with Mayor Brandon Johnson and Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker coming under scrutiny for their handling of the crisis.
At one point, residents we spoke with say they feel betrayed by city leadership and are concerned for their safety.
See that everybody that comes into any of our shelters has had a background check that we can look at reliably.
Tens of thousands of migrants continue to be bused from the southern border to Chicago, and the Illinois governor has had enough.
What we need is logistical support, that is help deciding where these folks ought to go.
Truss accuses them of neglecting the needs of Chicagoans in favor of pursuing a politically expedient agenda, a sentiment echoed by many disillusioned voters who feel their concerns have been sidelined in the pursuit of partisan objectives. The upcoming elections loom large in the mind of many Chicagoans, who see them as an opportunity to hold elected officials accountable for their actions, or lack thereof, in addressing the migrant crisis. The handling of this issue is likely to be a decisive factor for many voters, underscoring the political ramifications of immigration policy at the local level. Mayor Brandon Johnson, for his part, acknowledges the gravity of the situation, describing it as non-sustainable without significant federal assistance. His plea for federal intervention underscores the need for a coordinated, multi-level response to the challenges posed by immigration, one that transcends partisan divisions and prioritizes the well-being of all residents, regardless of their immigration status. Indeed, the migrant crisis extends far beyond the borders of Chicago, with other cities grappling with similar challenges. New York City, for example, is also contending with a surge in arrivals from Texas border cities, further straining already overburdened social services and exacerbating tensions between federal, state, and local authorities. Governor Abbott's decision to transport migrants to American sanctuary cities has further complicated the situation, underscoring the need for a comprehensive national approach to immigration policy that takes into account the diverse needs and concerns of communities across the country.
And we did all of that without having to cut back on services to people, as I've already expressed.
Says he will ask them if they can possibly take some migrants in, even he says if it's as few as 20.
What you're seeing here in the street, we've done everything possible. The federal government is responsible for what you're seeing here tonight.
These are not illegal people. The moment they step ground on American soil.
As the migrant crisis continues to unfold, finding sustainable solutions will require a concerted effort from all stakeholders involved. This includes federal, state, and local governments, as well as nonprofit organizations, community leaders, and concerned citizens. Only through collaboration and empathy can we hope to address the underlying causes of migration, alleviate the suffering of those in need, and build stronger, more inclusive communities for all. Transparency concerns and humanitarian crisis. In the midst of a migrant crisis, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has come under fire for his refusal to be totally open about how hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars ended up in the city's homeless shelters. Over the past 18 months, Texas Governor Greg Abbott has bussed in over 34,000 asylum seekers, and the Windy City has struggled to care for them. It has spent $300 million on the issue and is presently battling a measles outbreak at one of the shelters. It has also been at odds with the state of Illinois about where to construct additional shelters. By creating a page on the state's comptroller's website that would track the problem, the administration tried to allay concerns about how taxpayer money would be used for it. But the city won't say where all the money is going, and Democratic Mayor Johnson avoided questions from the media. Out of the 27 shelters in the city, only one provides full transparency regarding funding from the city. But the ones that they did receive up to $344,000 a week in taxpayer funds, the amount that the inn in Chicago costs. There are 1,500 beds there. That works out to a total of $17 million annually. While the Ogden shelter receives $150,000 per week, other shelters, such as the one located in the city's Pilsen neighborhood, receive $280,000 per week. These shelters have taken in millions of dollars over the last 3 months while providing services to 2,000 and 1,000 migrants, respectively. According to WTTW, the Pilsen shelter is well known for a measles outbreak that has resulted in 14 cases so far, forcing the city to impose vaccine requirements. NBC Chicago stated that the city is allegedly concealing the source of those monies by hiring private corporations from out of state to staff the shelters, a move that has further incensed the public. According to city records, Favorite Healthcare Standing, a Kansas-based business whose exorbitant costs have infuriated Chicago officials, has received $206 million. Equitable Social Solutions, a Kentucky-based business, has been awarded $45 million to map the locations of shelters. The head of the city's council's immigrant committee, Alderman Andre Vasquez, is upset that the city won't disclose the revenues produced by those businesses. It's a little more translucent than transparent, in my opinion. You receive certain details, but not the whole story, stated Vasquez. Not a single business or landlord has offered a statement on the circumstances. Our constituents are asking us these same questions, so I think something we've been looking at is how to really get more mandated reporting from the government as they're making decisions, Vasquez continued.
More translucent than transparent, right? You'll get some information, but not the full picture.
They're frustrated with the lack of transparency from your administration. They say, shelters are opening up in my ward, and I don't know they're opening until they're open.
Public dollars involved. Shouldn't the public know where they flow?
100%.
The fact that this $51 million approved today is only a short-term fix, and more money will be needed in just weeks.
Before they could meet with local officials and offer his building as a shelter, at least one landlord received orders not to show up. But Johnson sidestepped the subject when asked for further clarity. "I appreciate you asking that," Johnson replied. "Once more, we're meeting you where you are." The office of Mayor Johnson has been contacted by DailyMail.com for comment. After reaching a high of 15,000 in December, when authorities issued a warning that the system had reached capacity, the number of asylum seekers in municipal shelters seemed to be beginning to decline. Johnson then called for the problem to be labeled a federal emergency, freeing up cash to help the struggling communities, along with the mayors of Denver and New York, both of which are flooded with migrants. Chicago has been forced to seize other facilities as a result of the overcrowding of newly arrived migrants living in subpar conditions in shelters housed in converted warehouses. Johnson has urged Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to fulfill pledges to construct the state's own migrant shelters and stated that the city will not open any more. Chicago is a sanctuary city. Therefore, even if Mayor Johnson acknowledges that the massive influx of migrants is unsustainable, he is powerless to turn them away.
For the migrants, with Chicago bearing the responsibility for providing shelter, the county covers health care, and the state provides the wraparound.
There's work that has to be done to build it out, to make it suitable.
Say those expected to leave shelters will receive multiple notices starting 45 days out, leading up to their eviction date.
They are not seeing, it seems like this money just appears out of thin air, but isn't being invested in their own communities. Why do you think they feel that way?
He placed the blame for his city's inability to provide treatment for the roughly 15,000 asylum seekers jammed into 28 shelters throughout the city on both the Biden administration and Texas. Since August 2022, Governor Abbott has bused over 25,300 migrants to Chicago. Chicago made an effort to make them show up at prearranged times during business hours and to seize buses that disobeyed the regulations. But in response, bus firms began dropping off migrants as far away as Chicago, up to 60 miles, and Abbott began organizing charter flights for them. The circumstances in Chicago's refuges for migrants have come under close scrutiny ever since the demise on December 17 of 5-year-old Giancarlo Martinez Rivero. Johnson insisted that there was no evidence the shelter's condition contributed to this young boy's demise. Several months before Gene's passing, volunteers who make an effort to assist the asylum seekers as best they can make differing arguments and provide lists of concerns to city officials. In the frigid conditions beneath a leaky roof, 2,300 migrants were gathered together in the photos and videos taken inside the shelter where he passed away. In one video, a small child was shown using a tablet as a diversion while resting on a thin fold-out bed with what looked to be a bandage on his head. Another depicts a different child sobbing and coughing while volunteers checked them and took their temperature. In a third video, water could be seen accumulating on one of the beds from roof leaks. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.